Welcome to the deep dive. We've got the stack in front of us, the latest geopolitical risk reports, conflict analyses, and some pretty heady future forecasting documents. Our mission today is to cut right through all that noise.
Yeah, to synthesize it.
Exactly. We're going to pull out what you absolutely need to know about global instability right now in 2026. Where are the fuses shortening? How has U.S. foreign policy really shifted?
And the big one.
And the big one, what does the hard academic research actually tell us about why some wars just explode into catastrophes?
Well, the documents, they make one thing perfectly clear. The world was already, moving into a pretty dangerous new era. Great power competition was already the name of the game.
Right, this isn't new.
No, but the geopolitical shifts we're seeing now, especially out of the U.S., they haven't just continued that trend. They've effectively put a foot on the gas.
Accelerating the risk.
Big time.
Okay, so let's unpack that. This new global calculus. It seems to start with this very transactional kind of diplomacy. The centerpiece seems to be what some analysts are calling the Trump unorthodoxy, this willingness to just abandon traditional alliances for these quick fix deals.
Yeah.
Even with adversaries.
That is the absolute core of the strategic change. We saw it so clearly with the administration's engagement with Syria.
I mean, that was stunning.
It's almost unimaginable, right? A U.S. president sitting down with Syria's new president, Ahmed al-Sharaa, while al-Sharaa was still formally a U.S. designated terrorist.
And then offering sanctions relief on top of it.
And then offering sanctions relief. This willingness to engage with figures completely outside the normal diplomatic channels, that's what's defining this new policy.
So when you do that, when you make those kinds of deals, what's the result on the ground? Do these quick fixes actually, stabilize things?
No, they postpone the problem. That's really it. They create these short-term fixes that are, they're miles away from being genuine peace accords.
So they're just framework agreements.
Exactly. Take the January ceasefire in Gaza. One source literally calls it an ugly ceasefire. Ugly. It's a temporary solution. It's a way station, not a destination. The core disputes are left completely unresolved. You've got continued Hamas rule over a much smaller Gaza Strip, Palestinians crammed into horrendous conditions, and at the same time, Israel controls the rest and is actively blocking any reconstruction.
So it's just kicking the can down the road.
Mm-hmm.
What's the bigger strategic cost here, then? Because it seems like the administration is moving towards a world defined by spheres of influence, and that just completely undermines the post-World War II legal order.
That is precisely the grave danger. This doctrine, this spheres of influence politics, it doesn't see the world as a unified system under law. It sees it as separate power zones.
And what message does that send to Beijing or Moscow or anyone else with ambitions?
It's a dangerous one. It risks normalizing the idea that war is an acceptable, maybe even a necessary way for powerful states to get what they want.
So when the U.S. interferes in Latin America or threatens Denmark over Greenland...
Or just generally treats smaller states like pawns on a chessboard.
Right.
The message is clear. Might makes right. It's basically giving a global green light for adventurism to any other leader looking to expand their own influence.
Okay, so this backyard first policy is the context. And that leads us right to the biggest flashpoint under this new strategy, the escalation in Venezuela.
This is a huge strategic focus. The documents confirm it. The U.S. seems very interested in, let's say, pacifying the Ukraine conflict.
Pushing it toward a tense truce.
Exactly. And why? To free up diplomatic, economic, and especially military resources to focus on Latin America. Yeah. And Venezuela is ground zero for that shift.
And the pressure on President Maduro is not subtle. I mean, we are talking about a massive show of force.
Massive. The military buildup in the southern Caribbean is just staggering. You've got a flotilla of warships with the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford, at its center.
And a huge troop presence.
Something like 15,000 U.S. personnel in the region.
But this isn't just posturing. This force is being used. The sources are detailing months of deadly strikes on so-called drug boats.
That's right. The reports are talking about at least 66 deaths in 16 separate strikes. And it's not just at sea anymore.
It's moving inland.
Yes. There are documented reports of low-flying aircraft and explosions in Caracas itself. We're seeing specific strikes targeting Venezuelan military facilities in states like Miranda and Aragua.
And the administration's justification for all this, the official line, is that it's a fight to curb drug trafficking and to remove terrorists.
Right, especially after they designated groups like the Cartel de los Soles as a foreign terrorist organization, an FTO.
But here's the critical fact check that just seems to undermine that entire narrative. The sources are crystal clear on the data.
They are. The whole justification for this massive military escalation hinges on the drug fighting story, but the intelligence reports show that none of the fentanyl that's ravaging U.S. communities actually comes from Venezuela.
And that disconnect is fueling the controversy.
It is. Which brings us to the serious legal risks. We're now seeing bipartisan congressional inquiries being opened.
Over claims that survivors of a September boat strike were deliberately killed.
And look at the justification they're using for handling detainees. The defense secretary actually cited protocols from the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq.
The War on Terror playbook.
Exactly. To justify repatriating survivors from other strikes. When you're using a legal framework designed for the post-9/11 world for what's supposed to be a drug-fighting mission in the Caribbean, you are in a very, very gray legal zone. It's a high-risk policy.
High risk for the U.S., but what about the other great powers? How are Russia and China looking at this huge American commitment of resources right in its own neighborhood?
Well, for Russia, a key ally of Venezuela, they do not like this. Moscow would much rather the U.S. stay distracted, stay bogged down in Europe. That would let them more easily achieve their own goals, like annexing eastern Ukraine. So for them, this is a setback.
And for China?
China's in a tougher spot. They've been aggressively expanding their economic and security footprint all over Latin America for the past decade. So for Beijing, this American escalation towards Venezuela, that's a direct loss in what they see as their immediate neighborhood. It's a threat to their long-term investments.
Okay, let's shift our focus now. Moving from the Western Hemisphere to conflicts that the world seems to be largely ignoring because of these great power pivots. I'm talking about the severe regional fires brewing in Africa.
Specifically in the Horn and the Sahel.
We have to start with Sudan, a devastating civil war that kicked off in April 2023 and has now become this huge regional proxy battle.
It really has. You've got the regular Sudanese army on one side, backed by this coalition of Egypt, Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia.
A strange group of bedfellows.
It is. And on the other side, you have the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, which is being covertly backed by the UAE. So Sudan's internal war has become an extension of this broader regional power struggle.
And it's literally tearing the country apart.
Absolutely. Yeah. The RSF seized the city of El Fasher back in October, and that basically solidified this de facto partition of Sudan. The RSF controls the West Darfur, Kordofan, while the army holds the center and the east.
And the reports coming out of there are just catastrophic.
Yeah. The documentation from Darfur after El Fasher fell includes some truly horrific details.
I mean, we're talking about ethnic cleansing.
On both sides. But the sources point to specific gruesome footage of RSF fighters just slaughtering civilians. The scale of the violence was apparently so extreme that satellite images reportedly captured pools of blood visible from space.
An unbelievable humanitarian disaster that the world has basically decided it can afford to ignore.
For now, yes.
And while the world looks away from Sudan, right next door another fuse is getting shorter between Ethiopia and Eritrea.
Yeah, they're edging back toward open war.
What's the core issue there?
The flashpoint is Ethiopia's long-standing ambition to stop being the world's most populous, landlocked country. They want port access. And Eritrea, understandably given their history, sees this as a prelude to being reconquered.
But it's not just a simple border dispute. The internal situation in Ethiopia is making this so much more dangerous.
That's the volatility multiplier. Ethiopia is already fighting this complicated shadow war against two major rebel groups, the Amhara, or Fano, and the Oromo Liberation Army.
And then there's the fracturing within Tigray.
That's the critical piece. The leadership in Tigray, Ethiopia's northern region, has splintered. And one powerful faction has now allied itself with Eritrea, Tigray's bitter enemy from past wars.
That's a powder keg, an alliance of convenience between former enemies.
Precisely. And this is where it all connects. The instability in Sudan and these tensions are linked. A new Ethiopia-Eritrea war could easily become a regional conflagration.
How so?
Because Asmara, Eritrea's capital, already backs the Sudanese army. So if a war breaks out, Addis Ababa in Ethiopia might just decide to support the RSF in Sudan. And then the entire Horn of Africa could go up in flames.
So we've covered the specific hotspots, transactional fixes in the Middle East, the intense focus on Venezuela, these deeply volatile, ignored catastrophes in Africa. Let's zoom out now. If that's where conflicts are happening, the academic research you pulled gives us the ultimate lens for understanding why wars become catastrophic in the first place.
Yeah, this part is fascinating. Researchers looked at decades of data, everything from tiny civil conflicts to massive interstate wars, trying to find the one main driver of a war's final size.
And it's not what you'd think. It's not just how long the war lasts or how many soldiers are involved at the start.
No.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, it's neither of those.
Okay, so let's unpack this. If it's not duration or initial size, what actually causes a war to just spiral out of control?
It's primarily caused by escalation dynamics.
Escalation dynamics.
Yeah. The proportional increase in fighting intensity, usually measured in battle deaths over time. The key finding is that this high-variance escalation, it's just a generic feature of all armed conflict.
So in any given year, there's a chance it could get 10 or even 100 times deadlier than the last one.
A significant non-zero chance, yes.
Yeah.
It's the rate of change that dictates the final size, not the starting point.
And this research draws a really sharp, really vital distinction between civil wars and interstate wars in how they escalate. This feels like the crucial insight for understanding risk in 2026.
It is. The data shows that civil wars actually have this systematic self-limiting tendency. Once they get big enough, say, around 500 battle deaths per year, they tend to de-escalate.
Why is that?
It's likely because the non-state actors, the rebels and insurgents, they just face natural constraints. They run out of recruits, they run out of money, or they face overwhelming international pressure. The conflict eventually sort of regulates itself.
So a conflict like the one in Sudan, as horrific as it is right now, tends to have a kind of internal governor that eventually slows it down.
Tends to, yes.
But what about wars between states?
Interstate wars lack that self-limiting tendency. When you have states fighting, they have a much, much greater capacity to mobilize resources. Think centralized taxation, national conscription, formal alliances.
There's no natural ceiling.
Exactly. The academic model shows that interstate wars exhibit a persistent risk of continual escalation. They don't naturally slow down or revert to a simmer the way civil wars do. The potential for open-ended, continuous escalation is always there.
So, what does all of this mean for you, the listener? Let's put it together. We've established the global context. The U.S. is focused on its backyard, using short-term fixes that increase great power friction. Meanwhile, deep regional proxy conflicts are raging in places like Sudan. And now we understand the fundamental mechanism that makes a major war catastrophic, that persistent state-driven escalation.
That's the strategic picture, a world of renewed great power competition, with increasingly aggressive foreign policies driven by transactional goals.
And while that geopolitical forecast feels incredibly tense, with all this anxiety over proxy wars and, potential future conflicts in Asia, the technological forecasts present this amazing counter-narrative of hope. The futurology sources we looked at, they suggest the hardest part of fusion energy, the physics wall, might actually be behind us.
It seems fusion is shifting from being a complex physics problem to an engineering and scaling problem. And that's something humans are actually pretty good at solving.
This isn't just theory anymore.
Not at all. You have companies like Helion that have signed binding contracts to deliver fusion electricity to the grid by 2028. This potential for near-limitless clean energy is in a race against profound geopolitical instability.
And that technological acceleration is happening right alongside immediate economic disruption. I mean, anxiety over white-collar job losses from AI, debates over UBI, they're all entering the political mainstream. We are living at a point of maximum flux.
Which brings us right back to that core academic finding. Research shows that conflict escalation drives enormous uncertainty in predicting a war's final size.
Right.
So given that our current moment is defined by renewed great power, interstate competition, and this rapid technological change, the question for you to really consider is this. If the old limits on conflict size were based on resource constraints that AI and cheap, limitless fusion energy could potentially eliminate, is the world entering an era where the largest interstate conflicts truly have no systematic tendency to self-limit at all?
That is a deep dive for another time.